Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today, we're going to share taxi driver horror stories. First story. I work as a taxi driver. I fear the first Friday of every month. First time I got the call was a year back. It was a miserable January night, and the sky couldn't decide whether we were in a rainstorm or snowstorm. The roads were slick, the wind howled, and, most importantly, no one was out drinking. I was going to muster up a cough and tell dispatch I needed to clock out early, but before I could gather up the theatrical spirit, a ride request came in. Wolf Pines Assisted Living Facility to the airport. Good, long fare for outer city rates. First come, first serve. I wasn't the only one who wanted to call it an early night. No one volunteered. I would have kept quiet myself if it weren't for the second plea. The ride had been ordered 3 weeks in advance, but the dispatch girl forgot to put it into the system. She begged for someone to take the ride. She didn't want to get fired. I guess back then, I was a bit sweet on her. Even past the fizzle of the speaker, I could hear the despair in her voice. Couldn't have that. Volunteered just to put her at ease. Plus, airport fares always tipped. Figured I could make a quick buck before turning in for the night, and a quick buck I did make. It's not the money that bothers me. It's how I made it. So, I arrive at the nursing home. It's pouring down something fierce, and I can barely see past my windshield. Fare's nowhere to be seen. So, I sit and wait and pray that I'm not getting someone with heavy bags, or on a wheelchair, or any other combination of things that would make me get out of the car. Then, I think of how my grandma used to complain young folk never help and feel the slightest tinge of guilt. I almost get out of the car to see whether my fare isn't waiting in the lobby for me. But before my guilt drives me into the rain, the back door of my car opens. The man who gets in seems to have at least a century under his belt and smells so much like a hospital I have to roll down the windows. No luggage, though. Just a soaked hat that he places in his lap the moment he enters. I check the destination with him, give him a ballpark sum, and then set off. He doesn't make small talk, and I don't pry. I've driven for long enough not to ask people's business. The old-timer doesn't talk, but he breathes funny. There's a whistling in his throat that makes me wonder about how many smokes he used to take down when he was my age. To drown out that thought and my perverse need for a cigarette, I flip on the oldie station and play the man music he might have listened to in the tail end of middle age. The radio, however, does not stay on for long. About 15 minutes off in the airport, the radio, along with the rain, fizzles out. I didn't think it anything odd back then. As I said, it was a miserable night. Maybe I noticed the darkness outside growing thicker. Maybe I did find it odd that the world slowly descended into nothing but the dim reflectors on the edges of the road. Maybe I didn't notice on that first ride, but I made nothing of it. It wasn't until the old man suddenly grabbed me that I thought something amiss. It wasn't a rough grab. The old-timer's bony hands were in no shape to do me actual harm. But it did spook me, and I hate being spooked when I'm behind the wheel. Before the anger could reach my chest, though, it was replaced with confusion. The old man told me he wanted to get out of the car. He wanted to get out of the car. Right there and then. In the middle of a dark road miles away from the airport. The old-timer's expression was wholly blank, but his words were clear, and there was money in his hand. Money that happened to be triple the original fare estimate. He wanted me to take all of it. I put up a token resistance, but I did not argue with the man for long. I took his money, wished him a pleasant night, and watched him disappear off into the thick veil of black beyond the road markers. I was confused, but I've also been driving strangers for 15 years. If an ancient man stumbling off into the darkness was going to be the weirdest part of this story, I would have already forgotten it. 1 month later, on an unseasonably warm February night, I got the same exact fare. Wolf Pines Assisted Living Facility to the airport. Booked ahead of time, but once again, lost to the mystery of our reservation system. This time around, the passenger was an ancient woman who had the voice and stench of a lifelong smoker. Once she confirmed her destination with a froggy yes, she stayed completely silent until we reached that dark patch of road. Just like the old man, She wanted out and was willing to pay triple for the doors to be opened. I didn't tell Dispatch. Try to make sense of the rides would make me sound insane, and, more importantly, the extra money helped me cover some outstanding debts I had with some unkind characters. The prospect of sharing the money, or worse, having someone else take the fares didn't sit well with me. I didn't tell Dispatch the first month, or the second month, or on the third month when the pattern became crystal clear. Every first Friday of the month, at around midnight, I'd be driving an old person into pitch darkness and getting paid a surgeon's salary to do it. It was all strange. I'd admit that even back then, but people are strange, and in my line of work I meet a lot of them. I kept mum and kept the money and did my best not to analyze the details too much. When the first Friday of April rolled around, however, I found myself significantly more curious about my elderly customer's destination. She was old, just like the rest of them, but there was a sort of regal air about her. She had her hair all done up, smelled like a pricey perfume joint, and even though no amount of makeup could smooth the years off of her skin, she was all dolled up like she was ready for the opera. When I asked if she was going to the airport, she simply nodded. She seemed unsure of her destination. The whole ride through, she kept on fidgeting with her hands. When the darkness outside thickened and the radio buzzed out, she started to fidget harder. As that familiar patch of road came up, she didn't grab me or shout like the others did. She simply tapped my shoulder. Familiarized with the way these rides usually went, I slowed the car to a stop. She didn't get out. She didn't say a word or ready her money or anything else the old folks usually did. She just sat there, silent, fidgeting with her hands. It's then that I noticed the ring. It sat on her frail finger like the golden arches on a dead stretch of highway. The sort of diamond folks get shot over. She stopped fretting with a tired sigh and then slipped the ring off her finger. "I don't need this where I'm going," she said, as she extended the jewelry to me. I took it. I've been raised hungry enough to not reject a diamond when offered. That was good enough payment for me. I was happy to let her off right there, but then she reached into her purse, paid quadruple the airport fare, and wished me a good night. It was only then that she opened the door and walked off into the pitch darkness beyond. I didn't stop her. I was still in shock from the paycheck I held in my palm. I didn't stop her then, but I should have. I should have locked the doors and called the cops and demanded the old woman explain herself. But I didn't. I didn't want to involve the authorities on account of the diamond, but the ring did pique my curiosity about the care home fares. A couple days later, in the most casual way possible, I approached the dispatch girl. She said that the orders came in through the reservation system each month, but that she knew nothing else about the details. I didn't want to raise any heat, so I dropped it. The question of the ring still tugged at my sleep, though. So a couple days later, before my shift, I took a ride to the airport. During the day, the stretch of road where I usually stopped was far more populated, but the oppressive darkness wasn't hiding anything interesting. To the left, there were fields of rapeseed, and to the right, up a little hill, there was a fence dividing the public from one of the landing strips of the airport. The top of the fence had barbed wire, and there were no gates to pass through. I almost dropped the matter then, but on my way back to the city, I stopped by the nursing home. When I spoke to the receptionist, I tried to be, again, as casual as possible, but the moment I mentioned I was the taxi driver who picked up fares every first Friday of the month, the girl's jaw dropped, and suddenly she was the one asking questions. She too was confused about the rides. She wanted to know what happened to the old folks, whether there was anyone waiting for them at the airport, or whether they at least talked about where they were going. She suspected something was wrong. The moment I told her who I was, I got a chill down my spine. She seemed like the type to call the cops that might conduct interviews and take evidence. I've been driving a cab for long enough to know what happens to jewelry left in Evans lockers. If someone was going to misappropriate the ring, it was going to be me. I told her everything was fine, that the old folks just got out at the airport, paid me, and went on her merry way. She didn't seem too convinced with my explanation, but by the time she was asking more questions, I was halfway out the door. I just decided to accept my good fortune and move on. My grandmother wouldn't be proud, but that ring was worth more than anything I owned in my life. That diamond bought me my fair share of poker hands. I've always liked to play cards. It gave me something to do on my off evenings, and every once in a while it'd afford me a nice bottle of something. I've always liked to play cards, but the rush of playing for a couple days' wages is nothing compared to cashing a diamond. I did well. In the first 2 weeks, my luck brought me enough dividends to consider retiring. My third week made those vague plans a lot more concrete. But then, as these stories always go, Lady Luck found some different sob. You might think that I started asking my airport fares if they had jewelry out of greed, but the occasional ring or necklace I'd pick up on my rides quickly ended up being my lifeboat through the month. I had once again ended up in debt to some unkind characters. The ones that lend to cabbies and the ones that lend to high rollers, however, differ in temperament. At the start of every month, I'd rake in the cash on my airport fares, but I saw very little of it pass the inside of my cab. It was during those miserable months that I'd find myself locked in an endless cycle of regret. If I had only rejected the ring, I thought I wouldn't be in this mess. I had turned into a man the grandmother who raised me wouldn't recognize. I hated myself every time I shook down the old folks for their jewelry, and I felt even worse when I had to shark it up later in the night. I regretted not putting a stop to everything while I was still ahead. I cursed myself for not rejecting that ring when I still had the chance. Yet in all that self-loathing, I never wondered where those old-timers were going. I rejected that question. I wholeheartedly refused to wonder about the thick cloud of darkness that descended on us and the way the radio would crackle and anything at all connected with that deathly ride. I buried those questions because I knew they wouldn't lead me anywhere pleasant. For months, I kept a lid on that coffin, but 2 weeks ago, a familiar face rose from the grave. A stout woman with full cheeks and kind eyes. She looked just like my grandmother. When she got in the cab, she even grunted the same way my grandmother did whenever she got out of her chair. She told me she was going to the airport. I asked her where she was flying to. With a kind smile, she told me she wasn't allowed to say, but then, as we pulled out of the nursing home, she started to chat with me. I can't remember what we talked about, but she did start by asking how long I've been driving a cab for. Her name was Gabriella, and back in her younger years, she used to be a teacher. She asked me what my name was. When I told her, she let out a long sigh. As the darkness descended around us, Gabriella said my mother's name. My mother had been in the first class of high school students Gabriella ever taught. She remembered her well. She spoke at length about how creative my mother is and how hard she worked in class. Briefly, Gabriella mentioned what a tragedy it was that my mother passed so young, but then she continued to talk about her in the present tense, as if she was still around. Then, after telling me that I had my mother's face, she touched the side of my arm and asked me to stop the car. Taking a hefty lump of bills out of her purse, she said she would like to get out. I, again, asked her where she was going. She, again, told me she wasn't allowed to say. This time, her voice wasn't as kind. She placed the money on the armrest and reached for the door. I don't know if it was because she looked like my grandmother, or because she knew my mother, or whether the guilt of the months had simply compounded and been unearthed by a familiar face. I don't know what drove me, but I refused to let the old woman out into the pitch darkness. I locked the doors. All the warmth had drained out of Gabriella. She spoke slowly, and each word slid off her lips like a dagger. She wanted out. If I wasn't going to let her out, she was going to call the police. It was as if the taxi's headlights were pointed at cloudy water. The world scarcely existed a meter or two before us. I refused to let the old woman into the incomprehensible darkness that surrounded us. In turn, she fished an old flip phone and slowly pressed in 3 numbers. Squinting her eyes at the little screen, she put the phone on speaker. My resolve was strong when she had threatened to call the police, yet it softened considerably when I heard the voice on the other side of the call. Before Gabriella responded to the cops, she gave me one last chance to back out. I did. I unlocked the doors, and she hung up and wished me a good night and grunted her way off into the abyss. Back then, I didn't know where Gabriella was going. If I did, I would have kept the doors locked. I would have driven as far away from that horrible patch of road and gotten arrested and trialed and jailed. I would have done whatever was in my power to keep Gabriella from her grisly fate, but I didn't. I unlocked the doors and let her leave. My immediate instinct was to get as far away from that patch of road and never work a Friday night again, but my feet refused to press the pedal. Instead, I just sat there in that patch of cloudy black, completely paralyzed. My eyes were wet, and there was a hot poker traveling up my throat, and it was in that moment of absolute misery that I noticed the purse. Gabriella left behind her purse, and all that bounced in my head was my grandmother complaining about how young people don't help. I flicked on my hazard lights, grabbed the purse, and stepped out into the darkness. The flashlight on my phone did less to combat the murky night than my headlights did. With the night surrounding me being almost impenetrable, I had to paw my way around the taxi to make my way. I couldn't see anything, and in my blindness I almost turned back, but when I reached the back seat door of the taxi, the darkness gave away the slightest bit. As if Gabriella had somehow cut through the fog of black, the darkness lessened from the door of the taxi. My eyes still struggled to make sense of the world, but I could see the old woman once more. She was crawling on all fours up the hill towards the barbed wire fence of the airport. The hill wasn't particularly steep, but she wasn't particularly young. Gabriella was struggling with her climb. Watching the old woman crawl up the hill like a shivering infant made the burning coal in my throat burst into flames. I called out to Gabriella. I demanded that she come down from the hill, that she get back in the taxi, that she explain herself, or at least I tried to call out to her. The moment I opened my mouth, it was as if all the breath had been pulled from my lungs. The shouts that I hoped would dissuade the elderly woman from crawling up that dark hill turned into nothing but strained whispers. I took a deep breath and tried to shout once more, but then, just as Gabriella reached the top of the hill, a terrible sound blasted through the world. It was an unnameable sort of tone that was a mix of low hums and the gnashing of metal. As impossible as the sound is to describe, its volume was deafening. It came from behind the barbed wire fence and was accompanied with the rhythmic blinking of two blood-red lights. The flashing lights and the deafening noise terrified me beyond words, but the effect they had on the frail woman was outside the limits of human comprehension. As if she had been yanked by some eldritch puppeteer hiding in the darkness, Gabriella jumped to her feet and spread out her arms as if she was giving worship to the unseen moon. Then, like an athlete in her prime, the old woman leaped at the chain-link fence and started to climb to its top. There was no stopping her, but I did try. I ran up the hill, trying to scream past the roaring engine that had drowned out the rest of the world. It was of no use. She climbed the fence with incredible speed, and by the time she reached the barbed wire, it was clear there was no stopping her. I've driven a cab for 15 years. I've seen things, disturbing things, disgusting things, things which would steal away sleep from even the most hardened of men. None of them compare to the old woman's meat with the razor-sharp claws of the wire. The metal ate away at her clothes and flesh, yet she didn't exhibit the slightest bit of pain. Instead, Gabriella seemed to angle her body as to maximize contact. Her eyes were rolled back in her head, revealing only the whites, and even from down below, I could see a familiar kind smile on her lips. That smile disappeared the moment she noticed me. As if she had just woken up from a long sleep, her eyes took in the world around her in complete confusion. As gnarled as her body was by the metal teeth, however, Gabriella seemed to be more shocked by my presence than the state of her body. I could not hear her past the indescribable cacophony from behind the fence, but it was clear she was screaming at me. Even with her arm trapped inside of the sharp wire embrace, she tried shooing me away. Then, as suddenly as the terrible sound from beyond the fence came, it started to die down. The blood-red lights, the oppressive darkness, they too started to dissipate into a regular January night. For the briefest of moments, as the impenetrable abyss turned into an overcast night, I could see hints of what was hiding behind the fence. The red lights were attached to the edges of wings. Towering above us, big as an office building, stood a mammoth black Airbus. As massive as the plane was, however, it faded from reality as quickly as its horrid engine. By the time I could hear the old woman, her injuries had robbed her shouts of structure. She screamed, in between her coughs and groans and moans, that it was my fault. It was my fault that I came there and that I saw her. If someone saw her, she groaned, she wasn't allowed to go. They didn't like it when outsiders saw. By the time the paramedics arrived, she was long dead. Not being able to get her body off the fence, a fire truck joined the grouping of blinking lights at the side of the road. The cops were not far behind. There is no sense in telling them about the ring or about any of the other rides that ended in the middle of that dark road. That would only make me a bigger suspect. In regards to the events of that night, however, I told the cops what happened. She wanted me to stop the car. She tried calling the police when I didn't want to let her off in the middle of the road. She climbed the fence herself. The authorities didn't like this explanation, and they kept me in holding for as long as they legally could, but when no direct evidence of wrongdoing showed, they had to let me go. When I left the station nearly 2 days later, I didn't feel victorious. I felt guilty. I had not killed the woman with my own hands. In fact, I did whatever was in my power to keep her away from the horrid things that were hiding in the darkness. I had, however, for months and months and months, led other strangers down the exact same path. I am in no financial position to leave my job, but I hope that getting someone else to take my first Friday of the month shift would be easy. Whenever I bumped into any of my colleagues over cigarettes or coffee, however, they would avoid me. I used to be sweet on the dispatch girl. Used to be. While I was sitting in interrogation rooms, she was busy making up her own theories about how responsible I was for Gabriella's death. The casual questions I asked about the airport fares suddenly turned into evidence of wrongdoing. I might have been exonerated by the state, but the stories that float around my workplace take my presumption of innocence as a farce. When I first walked out of that police station, I was certain that I would never drive between the Wolf Pines Assisted Living Facility and the airport ever again. But as the weeks pass by, I fear that I will. No one will talk to me, let alone switch shifts with me. I fear what will happen on the first Friday of the month. Second story, the cab driver. Lucknow, India, December 16th, 2011. 5 p.m., a cold evening. I had to attend a dinner party around 50 kilometers away from the hotel I was staying in. I called the cab company and booked a pickup at 7 p.m. About 20 minutes later, I got a text message on my mobile phone with a driver name, Abdul Hassan, and a car registration number. I took a shower and got dressed up. Exactly at 7 p.m., I got a call from the driver. Punctual, I thought. I went downstairs and greeted Abdul Hassan, a man in his late 50s. He was wearing a traditional Indian dress, white kurta, and pajama. He was sporting a gray beard. Abdul told me that the drive would take a little longer than usual, maybe around an hour and a half, because of the foggy weather. That didn't bother me because I had to reach the party only by 9 p.m. I checked Abdul's ID and the car number and jumped into the front seat. 10 minutes into the journey, I noticed that Abdul had not switched on the meter. "Mate, you have not switched on the meter yet. How are you going to charge me?" I asked. "Never mind, sir. This trip is free for you." Abdul responded with a smile. "What?" I said with a puzzled look. "Sir, today is my last day in job. I am retiring tomorrow and will go on pilgrimage after that. This is my last assignment, and you're my last passenger. I cannot take money from you." Abdul clarified. "No, Abdul, I can't accept that. You give me service, and I pay for that. We have met only 10 minutes back. I can't take any favors from you for no reason." I shot back. "Sir, I always thought that I would do my last assignment for free. 200 rupees won't really make a difference to either of us, will it? Please allow this poor Indian man to feel good on his last day at work," Abdul said. I could not argue any further. I just smiled and thought that simple good things still have not vanished from this world entirely, and sometimes it is these poor people who remind us of these good things. I started chatting with Abdul. He had been driving for 35 years. Never once have I missed a pickup, sir. Never once have I not been on time, Abdul claimed proudly. I could not disbelieve him. He had already won my heart. But then I noticed his watch, an old, worn-out watch which was not working and still showing 6:45 p.m. I found it funny that a man who was wearing a dead watch was claiming to be so punctual. Your watch is dead, Abdul, I said a bit sarcastically. Oh, my father gave this watch to me. It doesn't work, but it's my lucky charm, so I wear it all the time. But I don't really need a watch to be on time, Abdul said with a smile. We both laughed, and indeed Abdul was on time, at least in my case, despite the dead watch. We continued to talk about various other things, his family, my family, about the city, and many more. 90 minutes spent with a good man. And we reached my destination, sharp at 8:30 p.m. I got down from the car and said to Abdul, "You are a good man, Abdul. I know you won't take money from me, but just as a memory of this drive, I insist you take this watch of mine. Don't say no." I took my watch off and gave it to Abdul. Abdul resisted initially, but accepted my little gift finally. I thanked Abdul, and we said goodbye to each other. Abdul left, and I walked into the dinner party. About 5 minutes later, my phone rang. I picked it up. "Sir, I am calling from the cab company. Sir, we are so sorry that your pickup hasn't happened yet. We will arrange for another cab immediately," a lady voice said from the other side. "What do you mean? I was picked up by your driver sharp on time, and in fact I have reached my destination now," I replied. "Who picked you up, sir?" the lady asked after a pause. "Abdul Hassan, the driver who was supposed to pick me up. I had checked his ID and the car registration number before boarding," I said. "Sir, you must be confused. Somebody else may have picked you up. Abdul Hassan died in a road accident at around 6:45 p.m. today, 15 minutes before your pickup time. He was on the way to pick you up when he met with the accident. We have been informed about his death just now," the lady said. I froze. I understood why Abdul didn't take money from me, because he didn't need any. Why his watch was dead, because his time stopped at 6:45. Yet, he did his duty one last time, and he was on time, as he had claimed, even on his last assignment. I started sweating even in the December cold. I looked at my wrist. My watch was still there. Abdul didn't need my watch either. Third story. My grandfather worked as a taxi driver in the USSR. One evening changed his life forever. There's a famous saying from the times of the Cold War: "There is no sex in USSR." First spoken during the teleconference between the USA and USSR in 1986, it created an explosion of laughter among the Western crowds. The laughter that drowned out the end of the phrase, "There's only love." That said, despite the popular myth, sexual and social life in USSR were always booming. A lot of families at that time were created because some poor student was willing to push his luck and save some money on contraceptives. People were dating like everywhere else, since, according to my grandfather, it was the best thing to do at that time. You might think that in a country so strict and regulated, there were no prostitutes, and de jure you would be right. Back in 1937, Stalin proclaimed that in a successful country that is on its way to building communism, women have no need to become prostitutes like in capitalist countries. And then single-handedly decriminalized prostitution, believing it to be the thing of the past. It was probably an ideological step, but as usual, the propaganda was very different from the reality. The prostitutes were still very much a thing. It didn't mean that the police didn't know about them or ignored them. Prostitutes were often arrested for things like being caught drunk in public places, indecent behavior, and other things. But none of those charges were serious, and very quickly they would roam the streets again. But the fact that they were getting away almost scot-free didn't mean that they were fine with being held in jail, even if for a few days. So they were always looking for ways to avoid the careful, ever-present eye of Soviet policemen. One such way was to team up with taxi drivers. Ever since the first taxi driver started roaming the streets of Moscow, looking for people in need of a quick ride, they were always known to be the go-to people when it came to illegal activities. They were not above secretly selling alcohol and contraceptives to couples they were driving, which effectively made them entrepreneurs and thus criminals in the eye of the state. And if you wanted to find some contraband, drugs, or a prostitute, a taxi driver was your guy who knows a guy, with the condition that he was going to drive you there at a triple price. My grandfather was one of such taxi drivers, and according to him, he was making a fortune on such endeavors. He was actively going out of his way to locate possible clients for his female colleagues. A couple of drunk students on the eve after the exam, looking to keep their party rolling, a well-dressed man with a lost look on his face coming out of Leningrad rail station who came from another city on a business trip and who could use an opportunity to spice up his sex life without his wife ever finding out. And the creme de la creme, a foreigner coming out of hotel in Tourist, a hotel reserved only for guests from abroad that the USSR found influential enough to lift the Iron Curtain for them. Journalists, diplomats, and sometimes even royalties. They were the perfect clients. They were always open to meeting an exotic, silent, but seductive stranger in a cold, distant land. They didn't know the prices, and, most importantly, they were rolling in money. Of course, in Tourist always had their own share of prostitutes flocking around it, like small fish around a shark, wanting to feast on the leftovers. These girls were high class, the best of the best, beautiful and mysterious, most of them speaking good English, albeit with a strong accent. They were straight out of a James Bond movie, which, to be honest, wasn't even far from the truth. All of them worked with KGB, who knew all too well that men physically couldn't keep their tongues in check after good sex and could sometimes unintentionally spill some highly classified intel. So while in Tourist was a profitable spot, there was nothing to catch there. The competition was just too harsh. But one June evening, near the sundown, as my grandfather was slowly driving by the hotel, he saw just what he'd been hoping to see. A young foreigner, somewhere in his mid-30s, gently refusing the offers of scantily clad women as he was passing by. The stranger. My grandpa wasn't sure if the man was his client or not. Perhaps the stranger was simply not in a hooking up. But Grandpa decided to test his luck anyway. He rolled down his window and shouted the few English words he knew. "Hey, good girl, not expensive. Go." It was a risk to do so. If there was a policeman within the earshot of him, my grandfather could be arrested for procuring. But luck was on his side. The stranger smiled and jumped into his car, and my grandpa pedaled it. The stranger smiled, said a few words in an unknown language, and stuck his head out the window to enjoy the incoming breeze. "What girl?" my grandpa asked the stranger while they were driving. "Blonde, brunette, redhead?" He was listing the words he knew, realizing that his vocabulary was quickly coming to an end. "Big tits." He remembered another word combination which was always making the foreigners excited. "I want authentic." The stranger suddenly spoke in broken Russian. "Authentic Russian girl. Those girls back there, same as home. I want a normal girl. Racy girl. Racy place. That can be organized." Grandpa smiled, switching back to Russian as well. "I'll get you the race you want, all right. An authentic experience to remember." He stopped near one of the payphones, jumped out, and quickly called one of the dozen phone numbers he had memorized. "Ira, get ready. I'm bringing over a client in 10 minutes. A foreigner." He informed the other side as soon as he heard the phone being picked up. "Mind your tongue, Georgie. I have guests. What if my mother picked up?" He heard the girl hiss at him. A few seconds later, however, she mellowed out. "A foreigner? It's too good to miss out on. Is he going to be all right with a takeout?" He said he wants an authentic experience, so it's your lucky day, my grandpa informed her. "Be ready in 10 minutes. We'll come pick you up." With that, he hung up and rushed back to his car where the stranger was patiently waiting. Of course, Grandpa could call many other girls, but Ira was the best one of them all, and he really wanted his passenger to be impressed. And since the stranger had said that he wanted an authentic, racy experience, he would be pleased with a takeout. To understand what a takeout is, you need to understand that all of the prostitutes couldn't bring their customers to their homes every day. Their neighbors would inevitably start to complain, bringing the attention of the police. So the work from home was reserved only for the rare occasions when no other options were available and the client was willing to pay extra. The cheapest and the most affordable option was a takeout, which worked perfectly in tandem with taxi drivers. First, the taxi driver picked up both the customer and the girl. He then took them to the forests outside of Moscow, where he parked on the side of the road in the shade of trees. The cars were sacred ground. No sex was allowed there as no one wanted to clean it up later, so the taxi driver would hand the horny pair a blanket, with which they would proceed into the shadows of the forest to do their deed under the starry sky. Grandpa said he had 2 or 3 books with him to kill some time, as well as the never-ending stock of cigarettes, so the wait was not that bad. You'd think that many clients would be against shagging in the forest like some dirty animals, but in reality, the opposite was true. People loved doing it in the wild. It helped them reconnect with their primal roots and added some spice into the process. A flavor you couldn't find in the city, unless you were brave enough to do it in a park. And so the grandpa was sure that the stranger would enjoy it as well. It was the most authentic experience he could present to him. They had to wait for Ira for 5 more minutes. Not a long time, but with each passing minute, the grandpa was becoming more and more worried that the stranger would lose his patience. Finally, he saw Ira come out of the building and sighed with relief. The wait was worth it. Ira was a real beauty, or at least according to Grandpa, who almost blushed when he was describing her. Young and fit, always smiling, with adorable freckles and a mane of red puffed-up hair, the top of fashion back then. She was wearing a denim jacket on top of her summer dress, a rare piece of clothing for those times, imported from abroad and resting on her chest. Hanging from massive, intricately designed chain was a large amulet in the shape of a scarab. That cursed thing, Grandpa always swore whenever he remembered about it. That cursed, idiotic trinket. Back then I had no clue. Not a slightest idea how much it would mess my life up. Back then, he really didn't know any better. When he saw it, he couldn't help but compliment Ira for having good taste. "You like it?" She smiled, fiddling in her hands. "I bought it from Borya, the Fartsovchik. He says it's really ancient. Came from Egypt to France, and then here. I had to pay a fortune to have it," she explained, coiling the amulet's chain around her finger. "But this little thing just wanted me to own it." Fartsovchiks were people who were trading with imported goods. To understand how dangerous it was, you have to know 2 things. Imported goods were usually contraband and entrepreneurship was banned across the USSR. So if you were caught selling foreign contraband from your home, you could be sent away for a really, really long time. But it was the 80s, the Iron Curtain was getting laxer, and the Soviet people who had already had the taste of foreign goods were willing to pay crazy money to have them. French makeup, VHS players, vinyl records of Jimi Hendrix. Some old-timers still say with regret that USSR hasn't collapsed. It was sold for a pair of jeans. Ira got into the back of the car, where the stranger immediately wrapped his hands around her. She smiled into his mustache, and Grandpa took off, trying extra hard to focus on the road and ignore the sounds coming from the back seat. After half an hour of driving, he arrived at his destination, a small, easy-to-miss spot at the edge of the road, where the grass did not grow anymore and the ground was stained with machine oil dripping from the car. He took a blanket from his car's trunk, handed it to smiling Ira, who gave him an excited wink, and watched both of them disappear in the forest darkness. The radio was silently playing some catchy tune about the sea, and the yellow light bulb of the interior lights was the only source of light aside from the stars above. The moon was shy that night and hid behind the earth's shadow. Grandpa lit up his cigarette, pulled out a book from a glove compartment, and tried his best not to imagine himself in that foreign stranger's shoes, if he was still wearing them, that is. Around half an hour later, he was startled when the door from the passenger's side swung open. He didn't hear them approach, didn't hear any chipper discussions on their way back, which would be a usual thing after Ira's meetings with her clients. No, instead he heard the man panting, heard him jump inside the car, and he heard only him alone. "Drive," the foreigner exclaimed. His voice sounded very distressed, and he was constantly looking at the forest with eyes full of fear. Go, go, go. Now, I pay extra. With his left hand, he was clutching the bloodied shirt on his chest, perhaps to keep his racing heart in check, or maybe to tug the cloth closer to a concealed wound. Despite his appearance and the shock he had on the grandpa, my old man still took a second to regain his senses, just enough to resist the temptation to follow the man's lead and succumb to fear. "Where's Ira?" he asked the stranger in a raspy voice. "There's your Ira." He pointed at the forest, continuing to clutch his chest with his other hand. "Crazy bitch attack me. I say racy, authentic girl. I say no crazy bitch. I need a hospital." It didn't seem right. Ira could throw quite a temper tantrum, but she wasn't the one to outright attack people, especially with such violence that it sends them fleeing in fear for their life. Of course, Grandpa didn't know her outside of work, but if he saw how she treats the clients who refuse to pay, then he might as well have seen it all. "Doesn't seem right," he grunted, "and we're not leaving without her." "Where do you say she is?" "Back there in the forest," he asked, opening the door to step outside. "Don't go," the stranger insisted, grabbing him by the sleeve. "She is super crazy. She attack you. Better go." He yanked the grandpa's sleeve. "I pay a lot. I have money, see?" He opened his wallet and showed my old man dozens of green bills, a forbidden yet invaluable foreign currency, the main reason he and Ira were together on that night. But my grandpa couldn't be convinced. He had to see her for himself to believe it. "We're not leaving her in the middle of the forest at night, crazy or not," he said. "I'll go talk to her and then bring her here. You stay put." "No, don't dash." The stranger tried stopping him one more time, but Grandpa yanked his sleeve out his hands. "Get your hands off me." The foreigner had no chance but to submit. Turning on the high beams, Grandpa climbed out of the car and headed for the forest. The car's beams were flooding the edge of the forest with light, but Ira was nowhere to be seen. When they took the blanket, they took it behind the bushes, away from the prying eyes. That's where he headed. "Ira!" He called for her, pushing the bushes aside. Despite doubting that she would attack him, he was still careful, almost as instinct. What if the stranger was telling the truth? Was she really mauled him? And if she was really so bloodthirsty, would she stop when she saw a familiar face or attack him as well? But why would she? And then, for some unexplained reason, he remembered her amulet. It was the only thing new about her, after all. Grandpa didn't believe in anything supernatural, but could it be that the amulet had some secret compartment with drugs in it, a compartment that the previous owners forgot to empty before selling the amulet? A compartment that could have been opened when two bodies thrashed against one another, spilling its contents into her face. It really felt like he was tracking a starved beast. Grandpa was hoping for the best, and yet he was straining his hearing, ready to hear the branches snap under the heels of Ira's fashionable boots. "Ira," he whispered, quieter than before, a bit more into the woods, and the light of his car's beams wouldn't be able to reach him anymore, leaving him in total dark. Would he really want to hear her coming toward him then? Perhaps it would really be better to go back to his car. He pushed another bush aside, and the shadow that was concealing Ira crept away, presenting her to the light. There she was, her dress and denim jacket completely red from blood. And yet, it was pretty obvious that she wouldn't harm the man, or anyone for that matter. She was dead. She was lying on her back, with her hands spread out in the shape of a cross. Her summer dress was pulled back all the way up to her belt, with its edges smeared in blood, and her panties were around her left ankle. But since the dead had no shame, she remained like that for everyone to see. Her neck and chest were covered in blood, and her scarab amulet, her prized possession she cherished so much, was now almost swimming in it. Grandpa leaped to her to see if she was perhaps still breathing, but nothing. She had lost too much blood to still be living. Driving her to the hospital would be pointless as long as saving her was a concern. But when he leaned over her, desperately trying to notice a faint breath, he spotted a few more details. For starters, Ira's hands had no blood on them. So the stranger's version that she attacked and mauled him was already falling apart. The thick chain of her amulet had left a purple imprint on her neck, and not just on the back of it, but on the front as well. The man involuntarily raised his hands to his mouth when he realized that Ira's favorite trinket was the thing that was used to abruptly end her life. And yet, if she was strangled, then where was all the blood coming from? Judging by the pattern of how the blood spread, it seemed that the wound was on her neck, yet the amulet with its thick chain was obstructing his view. He pushed her treasured trinket to the side to get a better look at the wound on her neck and froze. Perhaps Ira was indeed strangled by her own amulet's chain, but now it seemed that it was done only to subdue her. For the unmistakable bite mark in the shape of human teeth on her neck indicated that the killing blow was done afterward. The last bit of puzzle finally landed in its place. The edges of Ira's dress were bloodied because they were used to wipe the killer's mouth and hands after the man was done. Grandpa jumped to his feet and turned around to see that the foreigner wasn't in his car anymore. He stepped out of it and stood in front of the beams, casting a gigantic shadow on the forest. There were no signs of him being distraught anymore. He stood there in full confidence, with his head held high. Grandpa could see only the man's silhouette, highlighted by the car's beams. Yet he understood what the man did. He wiped some blood off of his shirt with a thumb and then suckled on it. His head slightly rolled back in joy as he was enjoying the last bits of his meal like a toddler who wasn't yet trained in proper etiquette. And then, as if to mock the very concept of death, that stranger, that godforsaken man from enigmatic lands, who had been heard speaking an unknown language and who killed his victims by sucking their blood out, spoke in perfect Russian, in perfect female voice. "Come back to the car, Georgie. I told my mom I went out to see a friend for only an hour. She must be worried by now." There was no mistake about it. It wasn't just a female voice. It was the voice of Ira, speaking about the events the stranger could have no clue about. He was too shaken to move, and so the man started walking towards him instead. He was moving with perfect confidence in his stride, with absolute certainty that he could take on another prey and come out victorious. So Grandpa ran away. He rushed through the forest, leaving his car and Ira's body behind. He ran through the darkness away from his pursuer, not even bothering to look back if he was being followed, until many hours later he happened to stumble upon another couple. He says that the man got startled and started threatening him to lock him down if he told anyone he'd seen him there with a prostitute. So must have been so high-ranking party officer, but Grandpa paid him no attention. He headed straight for the taxi driver who brought them there. Taxi drivers in Russia always had a keen sense of solidarity. So when my grandpa emerged from the forest, tired, with blood on his fingers and fear in his eyes, he listened to him. He used the radio to call the dispatch and inform them that there's been a murder in the forest. Only when the police came to the crime scene, they didn't find a man, only the car and the body, as well as the bloodied amulet, with its chain's elaborate pattern matching the bruises on the victim's neck and Grandpa's handprints all over it. Handprints from the time he, concerned with Ira's health, moved it aside to take a better look at the wound. No one had seen him pick up the stranger near in tourist. On another day, Grandpa would consider it a great luck. He also didn't inform the dispatch about that, as he wanted to pocket all of that money to himself. Another grievous mistake. All in all, the detectives didn't believe his story and didn't care that he was the one who called the police, considering it to be a weak attempt at creating an alibi. They had a crime, a suspect, a victim, and, most importantly, the murder weapon which tied everything together. The bloody amulet. As for the motive, unrequited love. Ira's neighbors said that they often saw her emerge from his taxi, often enough to remember him. They suspected that he wanted her all for himself, and when she refused, he killed her in the woods. The case was ready in a record 2 days and passed to court, where Grandpa, by some sheer miracle evading a death sentence, got charged with murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Worst of all, my grandmother believed the police. Her husband, whom she loved so much, turned out to be a cheater and a killer of whores. In one moment, Her entire world turned upside down, and it took him 20 years' worth of letters from prison to convince her that he didn't do it. Despite working with the prostitutes, despite liking Ira and blushing when he saw her kiss another client, he always remained loyal to his wife. And so her unbelief was the most damning thing for him. He is free now, although he has served all 25 of those years. I wasn't yet born when he was incarcerated, so it was strange suddenly having another father figure. We get along surprisingly well, so he often shared that story with me. I was always skeptical whenever he got to the part where the man started talking in Ira's voice, but I always let it slide. The man was very old and endured quite a lot, after all. He passed away 1 week ago. I was among one of the last people he spoke to. The night before his death, before his heart gave out and knocked the wind out of him, making him fall headfirst on the hard floor, he told me that story one more time. Only that time, he decided to finish it with a cryptic message for me. A message that is making me question what I really knew about him. Sometimes, the biggest stranger a man meets is the beast that dwells within him. Fourth story. Taxi cab confession. I don't sleep most nights. 4 hours every couple of nights is fine. Staying up doesn't bother me much, though. I was an MP in the Marines, so I was used to long nights of driving around. After I got out, I figured I might as well get paid for it. 2 years ago, I got stabbed in the stomach by a junkie looking for quick cash. I was stupid and tried to wrestle the knife away from him. Turns out I was a little rustier in defensive tactics than I thought. The junkie took my wallet and left me to die with my intestines hanging out. Somehow, someway I managed to drive myself to the ER. I vaguely remember collapsing just outside the front door. The doctor told me that I had died for 1 minute and 46 seconds on the operating table. It took me a few months to recover, but before long I was back on the road. Something changed after I died, though. I started seeing things, strange things. I'm not sure how to explain it. It's as if my third eye opened. I see ghosts, ghouls, and monsters of all sorts roaming the streets at night. I'm a natural storyteller at heart, so I thought I'd share one with you all. If you have any interest in hearing some more, let me know. Taxi cab confession. It was just after 9 p.m. when I got a call to go out to the suburbs. The summer sun had just set. It was my first call of the night. We were going to the airport. Normally, I hate to go out to the suburbs, and this time was no different. I've got childhood issues I'd rather not get into yet. My checker cab, lovingly nicknamed Harriet, my old dog's name, was beat up, but she was reliable. Most customers complain about the smell of rotting eggs, but there was nothing I could do about it. I don't get many tips when I'm driving Harriet around, but honestly, I don't really care. I got to the neighborhood around 9:30 p.m. Something in my gut said to cancel the call as soon as I passed through the guard shack. I was already there, though, so I pressed on. I had supposed since I'd already died once that I could do it again. 147 Maryland Avenue was nothing special. It was a plain house with plain cars and a plain owner waiting outside. I tried to dismiss the gut feeling, but it wouldn't go away. When I stopped Harriet in front of the house, I got a better look at the fare. The man was around 6 feet tall, with neatly combed blonde hair. He wore typical dad clothes, khakis, and a polo. The outfit was completed by glasses that would have cock-blocked him in high school. The fare carried a single rolling suitcase with a satchel resting neatly on top. I popped the trunk, and the man went behind Harriet. There was something in his walk that screamed, "I'm a little off," but only just a little. The hairs on my neck stood on end, and I was fully prepared to drive off without him. He returned to the passenger side and got in. "How you doing?" I asked nonchalantly. It was my typical opener, and I never deviated from it. Hell, I still say it to all my fares. It'll either start a conversation or end it right there. I was hoping for the latter, but I guess the man was feeling chatty. I could always be better, I suppose. The man spoke slowly and seemed to lack any sort of emotion at all. His drawl was nondescript, and I couldn't place where he was from. It was almost as if he weren't a person at all, but like a robot sent here to imitate us. "My name is Charles. What is yours?" I noticed that he seemed unaffected by the stench in the cab. Most people recoil when they first catch a whiff. "They call me Ray." I lied. My name was Charles, but the last thing I wanted was to bond with this man. He gave me the chills. I adjusted the rearview mirror to get another look at him. When I did, I saw that Charles was staring directly at me. I quickly shot my eyes forward. That's odd. It says on the app that your name is Charlie. It must be wrong. You should let your superiors know. Charles' tone had shifted to slightly condescending. Yeah, I'll do that, I said as I turned up the radio, desperate for the conversation to end. I shot another glance to the rearview mirror and saw that Charles looked slightly frustrated. Could you turn that down, please? There was a harshness in the way that he said please that I can't even begin to describe. Not wanting to anger the man any further, I turned the radio off. Sorry, you struck me as a Def Leppard kind of guy. I smiled faintly into the mirror. He did not seem amused. I don't know what a Def Leppard is, but I don't like it. Charles sneered slightly at me, as if I had somehow gravely disappointed him. How had he never heard of Def Leppard? He continued. I was actually hoping to chat a little. You see, I've never confessed to anyone before. I can tell you've seen things in your line of work, but I can assure you that you've never seen anything like me before. Charles was sporting a wicked grin. I really couldn't place this guy. First, he's unemotional. Then he's Chris Brown on a bad day, and next he goes all Charles Manson on me. I started to pull over to the side of the road. I really didn't want to be stabbed again, so I began to take the wrong exit. I knew how to get to the police station from here. So help me God, if you pull over, I will paint the front windshield with your brains. He snapped at me. I heard a gun cocking, so I swerved back into the correct lane. Charles let out a laugh that sounded rehearsed. You're smarter than you look, Charlie. Don't get too smart, he said, and tapped the barrel against my head. From the rear view mirror, I could see that it was a very large revolver, a .44 maybe. I had a gun drawn on me before, but it hadn't felt like this. Of course, I kept my own .38 in the glove box, don't tell my company. But there was no way I was going for it now. There was a soul-draining hopelessness filling the car. What did you want to tell me before we get to the airport, Charles? We've only got about 20 minutes before we're there. I offered a weak smile to the deranged man. That's more like it, Charlie. Now I know we don't have long, so I'll get it all out quickly. Charles uncocked the gun and placed it in his lap. I'm not sure where to begin. I killed my first person when I was 16. It was a man who looked awfully like my father. I stuck an ice pick in between his first and second vertebrae. I saw that in a mob movie once. Why did you kill someone who looked like your dad? I was terrified. He was in the same position to do that to me as well. I knew in that moment that I had the Widowmaker, fabled serial killer of middle-aged men, sitting right in the back seat of my cab. Please, Charlie, if you keep interrupting me, then I won't be able to finish, Charles snapped again. I decided to let him continue uninterrupted. Now, where was I? Yes, first and second vertebrae. He went quiet for a moment. I looked back and saw his thick glasses reflect the passing lights, and he was staring off into nothingness. I assumed that he was caught up in the memory. I was careless, young and dumb. Due to my inexperience, I had left my fingerprints on the handle. You see, the handle which I left buried in his neck and deep into his skull. The handle which was found much quicker than I anticipated. They've had my prints in their database for almost 25 years now. I kept my mouth shut despite the myriad of questions just waiting to be asked. He was the first, but he certainly wasn't the last. I wised up quickly and wore gloves for the rest. Charles began to laugh. Did you know that the police thought I was teasing them by giving them my fingerprints? They were even calling me the Widowmaker. That's what my father, the hero cop, told me behind closed doors. Of course, he also raped me mercilessly behind those same closed doors. They didn't give him a medal for that one, though. I wish I had killed him before his diet of steak, beer, and cigarettes did. His death didn't stop me from killing like I thought it would have. I took the exit towards the airport. We were almost there. All in all, I've killed maybe 16 men. One was a police officer who came close to catching me. He found me with a corpse in the passenger seat. Once he saw my trademark ice pick in the skull, he knew he had the chance to catch a big fish. I gutted him and tossed what was left into the river. On the way home, I met my wife. Funny how that works. How in the absolute did this guy manage to get married? He was an absolute monster. She was perfect for me. No personality whatsoever, and she already had kids from her last marriage. I wish I could have loved her, even just a little bit, but there was nothing there. I hated having to kill her and our kids. She found the last ice pick I had ever used, you see. It still had the blood from number 15. Alice sent the blood to be tested in the lab she worked at. I knew that something was off with her, but I never let on. My suspicions were confirmed when I found the results in the mail this morning, as I had gotten up before her. I made it quick for her and the kids. Charles began to drift again. We were on the long road, approaching the airport, when I saw the roadblock. Red and blue lights shined brightly in front of the departing flights. Police littered the road, and helicopters were dominating the night sky. Shit, was all Charles could muster. He sounded defeated. Pull over into that empty spot. The gun was back in play, and he motioned towards a lone, parallel parking space. I did as he said, and before long, we were watching the police far in front of us. I'm never going to make it now, Charles admitted. There's only one option left. I kept my eyes forward, hoping that maybe someone had seen us pull into the spot. I heard the revolver cock. The back windows shattered as a lone gunshot made my ears ring. Jesus Christ, Charles, what the? I turned back and saw the mess he had left in my car. Charles had placed the barrel under his chin and blew the front of his face off. All he had left were his piercing blue eyes behind those thick glasses. He wasn't dead, though. We locked eyes as he began to choke on his own blood. I could see it in his eyes that he had regretted his decision to shoot himself. I'll never forget the sounds of his death rattle. Charles' eyes rolled over white, and then he was finally dead. The police had heard the shot and came scrambling towards the car. They found me sitting in my cab, staring at the corpse of the Widowmaker. They took me away and told me they found his family at the house, each one stabbed to death in their beds with an ice pick. Apparently, Charles had one more ice pick in the satchel that he had been carrying in his lap. A couple of months went by before the police gave me Harriet back. They told me they even replaced the broken glass, which was a nice touch. Another cabbie gave me a free ride to the repo lot. When I sat back in that driver's seat, it felt like being back in my old skin. When I adjusted the rearview mirror, I saw Charles sitting in the back seat. His face was still destroyed by the revolver. His eyes were white, and he was still wearing those goddamn glasses. Blood was pouring from his gaping wound. The Widowmaker twitched and jerked sporadically as I stared into the mirror. I turned Harriet into a metallic cube later that day. Fifth story. Strange dog creature. This happened a couple of years ago in Manchester, UK. I lived in the north of the city in a town called Bury and worked early hour/night shifts at the airport. I'll put the real place names on here for anyone that would like to Google the areas in question. Anyway, one early morning in winter, around 2 a.m., I set off to work. Around this time, there was intermittent overnight roadworks on the motorway, which would send you off at a junction without warning, diverting you back onto the motorway further down. And this night was one of those, taking me off at Worsley and sending down through Worsley, skirting near Eccles towards Manchester's large shopping mall, the Trafford Centre. I knew the area, having lived there a few years previously, but this time of night seemed unusually quiet and deserted on the roads. Normally, I'd see the odd person drunkenly staggering down the street, or late-night taxis scurrying round. But tonight, nobody was on the streets at all. I drove down Barton Road, which, to my left, is followed by a dark canal, which was mist-covered, and slowed my car up to the red light at the intersection just before you cross an old Victorian-era swing bridge, Barton Swing Bridge, which crosses the River Mersey below. As I slowed to the lights, I suddenly became overtaken with an intense feeling of dread and panic. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I broke out in a cold sweat for no reason. I had this feeling like a smackhead or someone was going to jump out of a nearby bush and jump my car. Then, as cliché as it sounds, my car radio suddenly cut out, and the only noise was my idling car engine. The lights turned green, and I suddenly didn't want to go through them, over the darkened swing bridge that loomed ahead of me, almost like it dared me to cross it. I swallowed hard and nervously put my car into gear and crept forward across the junction. The bridge clanked and seemed to groan as I moved hesitantly over it, then followed the curve of the road around a sweeping bend to the left, then to the right, with nothing but tall, dark trees leaning over the road on either side. Around the bend on my driver's side, the right in England, is an old monastery, and through the gates of the monastery I could make out the shape of a dog about to cross the road in front of my car. So I slowed. This dog was huge. It was black. It actually looked muscular from its outline. As I completed the bend, my headlights hit this dog. All I could describe it as, my headlights hit nothing. No reflection off its coat. No details, just like a void, a shadow. This dog turned to me, and its eyes glowed yellow. Not reflections like you get off a cat or a fox or whatever, they glowed. This beast then ran across in front of me. It clearly wasn't a dog. It ran an emotion that wasn't a dog. As ridiculous as it sounds, it seemed to run in a jerky motion, like the really bad CGI motions of old Sinbad film sea monsters. I followed this beast till it ran to the side of the road out of my headlight beam and seemed to completely vanish from sight. I looked at my side windows, side mirrors, rear mirrors. Nothing. As my car rolled around the next bend in the road past this monastery, the car radio suddenly blurted back into life, startling me. That feeling of dread lifted, and this thought randomly came to me. You wasn't mean to see that. It wasn't for you. I felt completely normal, but absolutely perplexed by what had just happened to me. I looked up things that might be this thing I saw. Nothing sounds like it. A thing called the Manchester Shug, which was a headless dog or something, but it doesn't sound like what I witnessed. If anyone has any clue, I'd love to know. It's bugged me for years now. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.